Hey everybody, welcome. Um, so why don't we just take a moment to do what we do at Kripalu, which is allow ourselves to find a little bit of centering. So if you want to do it with your eyes open, that's beautiful. If you want to do it with your eyes closed, that's beautiful too. I'm going to close my eyes for a few minutes. We can invite our attention to really find our breath. And notice if there's any change in the rhythm of our breathing as we attend more closely to it. Inviting in any further relaxation or unwinding of any tension that doesn't feel supportive to you. And feeling the support from below, from Great Mother, Mother Earth. And Thich Nhat Hanh says that Mother Earth is a bodhisattva, a being of great compassion. Can we feel that compassion rising up from below us? And just feeling great sky and beyond above us, protecting and holding us from above. Maybe for a moment, just silently to yourself, let this question wash over you. How am I doing right now? How am I feeling in this moment? What sensations am I aware of in my body? And then without letting go of that deeper awareness that may have been cultivated in these few short minutes, but we can let go of the sense of practicing. And if our eyes have been closed, we can open them up. And here we are. Monica,
Hi
good
there.
to be with you. Do you want to give us uh just a who are you? Where are you coming from?
Okay. My name is Monica Mian McNamara. I'm from New York, but I live in Boston. Um, and I'm here this week at Kripalu with a program that my organization, Dignity Beyond Borders, is partnering with Kripalu in bringing together women who have lost a child due to incidents of mass violence. And so that's what brings me here in this moment.
Yeah, thanks, Monica.
Mm.
I want to get in and explore more about the program that you're running this week at Kripalu, but also the programs beyond that. But
Yeah.
grew up in New York, living in Boston. Give us a little bit about the who was the 5-year-old Monica.
Yeah. Um, Grew up in New York with a great sense of the city, Manhattan, and its importance, and always a reverence about that. And likewise, if you're familiar with New York, being by the ocean. So, two things that really had an influence. And I think very early on, I um, was in love with dance, and I had the opportunity to take dance classes with a woman who had studied with Isadora Duncan. And for those of you who know that name or don't, she was one of the pioneers of modern contemporary dance in that she stepped away from some of the structure and I will say constriction, and I don't mean it in a negative way, of, for instance, ballet and balletic forms, and really was more about what moves the body, how does the body move, how does the body give expression to nature, to art, etc. And I'll tell you, it was pretty intoxicating to a then maybe 10-year-old. And I just thought, oh, I found my people. And so that was a wonderful beginning. And I credit Anita Zahn, that teacher, in that has really stayed with me and been a guide. What's the dance? I'm a therapist, a practicing therapist. But I often think in terms of um, how we are in movement, how we are in relation to one another, our families, our work, nature, etc. And what's the best way to invite the dance that allows people to feel authentic in
Yeah,
their being.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Personal question, you can say pass at any point, but why was that sort of what I'm hearing as a deep appreciation for an attraction towards fluidity and going beyond the boundaries and beyond constriction? Why did that appeal to you so much?
Well, that's a long story, but no, I think that I grew up in a more traditional family, and I think I was always sort of looking around the corner to see what else there was. Had wonderful input from my family, a lot of love, etc. But a deep curiosity, and I think probably within my family was the natural born therapist. Like, why do people say this or do that, and how do they connect, and when is it working, and when is it not working? And so I think those were the kinds of observations I was paying attention to.
Yeah, that's great. Andrew is just letting us know that he studied 9 years professional dance with Ruth uh, Courier and Elaine Summers.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, and that's what ultimately that whole body, mind, heart connection, soul connection led him to yoga. That's great. Thanks, Andrew.
That's so interesting. I know Elaine Summers' work. So
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
And so dance, fluidity, therapy, and somewhere peace.
Yeah. I love nonlinear progressions.
Mhm.
I can appreciate linear progressions too, but I think dance led me a lot to look at relationships, etc. Got involved with doing therapy.
Mhm.
Um, then started to think about what happens within systems and within groups. And, so much of dance background had to do with identifying patterns and noticing when change happens and kind of getting ideas about how to create change in patterns. And at a certain point, about maybe 16 or 17 years ago, I was invited to participate in a program called Project Common Bond,
Mhm.
that was for young people from around the world who had lost a family member to an act of terrorism. And it was going to be this multicultural gathering for a week. And in the invitation, I was being asked as a therapist to come and just be on hand and be available. And I remember saying yes before I was ready to say yes, but I thought, whoa, that yes just came right out. And once I got there and spent the week and saw the possibility of young people coming from opposite sides of a conflict, um, coming from very despairing conflict zones, etc. But finding finding a connection with one another, um, being able to both grieve the loss, but show the vulnerability and the strength, and to access joy as well. It, in my mind, it signified this idea of, oh, rather than peace total, pieces of peace is maybe a possibility to aim for. And I stayed on with that program for the next 16 years and had the privilege of being able to shape what was the curriculum, and introduced through a colleague of mine the idea of dignity as a way of addressing conflict. Good friend and colleague, Dr. Donna Hicks, did a beautiful exploration coming from conflict resolution background on this idea of dignity as being the thing that often is what keeps conflict in place, that people do not feel that their dignity is being honored.
Yeah.
And once that language came into the mix, it really made a difference.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I want to ask you to maybe share an example in a moment, but it's bringing to mind one. I've spoken about this individual before, but Brendan Duddy, who worked sort of as a community peace builder, really sort of by mistake almost, he fell into this role. And one of the things that he did around dignity was in the north of Ireland, in Derry. There's not everyone will know this. There's a lot of parades that happen, marches that happen each year to celebrate certain victories, which were predominantly sort of victories of Protestant armies over Catholic armies, and they go through neighborhoods that are predominantly Catholic or nationalist, etc. And there was always a huge amount of conflict around these things. And a lot of sort of rerouting of the parades and banning of the parades, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one year he came forward, and when the organizers were trying to figure out what to do, he stood up and he said, your culture has a right to exist, when he was talking to the Orange Order, which are the organizers of these marches. And he says, your culture has a right to exist and has a right to express itself. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, it like totally changed the conversation, because what had been happening was this sort of fighting for an expression of culture, and there's a lot behind it, right? There's a lot of poor intentions behind these things, as well as sort of honorable intentions. But he just kind of cut through all that, and he said, I don't want you to feel like you have to fight for your culture's right to dignity.
Right.
And then that parade that year apparently, was organized, and it was peaceful. Because holding this sort of tone, this intention, this vibration of dignity, just like you're speaking to.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it really exemplifies that idea of when through conflict we other people and make them the enemy, etc. We can cast any kind of projection onto them.
Yeah.
And it is a disservice, and it is a violation of their dignity. And we often will ask the question, who's at the table and who's not at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And with the young people that I have worked with, they will share that idea that, they came in with a view that if I'm, from Palestine and you're from Israel, you have nothing but hurt in mind for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I played soccer with you, or I did art with you, or we had a conversation. And that capacity to say, let's not make it us and them.
Mm-hmm.
If we set the table and invite you all here, how can we have these difficult conversations? Because that's where we all get stuck.
Yeah.
And, just having gone through the election, regardless of what your hope for the outcome was, really showed how difficult it is to have those conversations in a way that is inviting rather than damning.
Yeah. And that's part of what part of this series is about, is inviting in conversations where we're opening up understanding and capacity to be in complex dialogues, and not to you and I aren't going to resolve anything, but it's at least can we introduce something? Can we just like play with the dials a little bit somewhere to see what might happen?
It's really hard.
Yeah.
I have had a number of situations, again, within the election cycle, of making assumptions about people and who they were for,
Yeah.
and not engaging. And I was in a situation in a cab where I found myself sitting there. There were stickers all over the cab, and I thought, oh, I wouldn't have gotten in this cab to begin with.
Yeah.
And then I thought, wait a minute, who am I? What am I doing here? And so I had to control my voice and say, hey, I noticed that this is your candidate. Can you tell me what it is about them that you were interested in? Had a very rich conversation
Yeah.
that didn't, I don't think, change either of our decision around voting,
Yep.
but it changed a lot for me, and made me aware of all the ways that I do that shutting out and othering. And so
Yeah.
I think that's the hard work here,
Mhm.
in conflict and in peace building, is it's hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. I was uh I was just in Oklahoma for the last 4 days, and um on Sunday, I just before my flight, I realized that uh I had the opportunity to be with a community that I'm not typically with because of where I live in Western Massachusetts. And the Sunday after the presidential election, I went, okay, so I'm going to go to the largest evangelical church I can find, and I'm going to go to their worship service
Mm-hmm.
and to try to learn. But I definitely walked in with a whole lot of assumptions about what I was going to experience.
Yeah.
And I thought there would be a lot of sort of potential for sort of bravado and sort of like victory, energy of victory, and maybe that sort of being done unkindly, that celebration done unkindly. And I thought there'd be a very sort of like political sermon, by the pastor. These are the things I was expecting. Um, and what I experienced was when somebody found out that I walked in, I said, "Hey, I've never been here before. Can you tell me where to go?" And this elderly uh, volunteer literally linked my arm and walked me in seat to my seat and made sure if I wanted coffee, they do coffee there. I got coffee, and just like completely beautiful hospitality.
Yeah.
And, didn't ask who I'd voted for or anything like that, of course. And then the pastor it was a video which I'd never seen in church before. It's not what you get back home in Ireland, but there was a video, and he had pre-recorded the sermon, so didn't know what the outcome was, and he basically said, we are a community where we don't know how everybody votes, and we have 45 locations around the country, and our job is to be a community regardless. And our job, the thing that will help us be a community, is if we are kind to each other, that we respect each other, and that we love each other, and that we bring that message out into the world. And at least at the public facing level, this was such a beautiful experience, and such sort of an affirming experience of maybe at the grassroots level, how people are still moving in the world, even though what media tells us is what's happening, or what's happening at the sort of the higher echelons might look and sound very different. And it was just one experience, but it was one that, destroyed some pretty good assumptions that I was holding as I was walking in the door.
I think that idea of building community, and again, I know community in the sense of welcoming people, not community in the sense of, well, we believe this, and so we'll stay over here and we'll just believe in those things. But, there was somebody was giving a talk about overcoming trauma, and the research had shown that people really have the capability of overcoming trauma and finding resilience. But the key to it was not that there was one way to do it, but a kind of flexibility in thinking. And so if you've tried something over and over and you keep getting the same response, where's the flexibility? And I try to think about that in the work for myself and in the work that I do around, rather than this all or nothing approach, what's something that can happen that just allows you a little bit more room and a little bit of a better view?
Yeah. What have you noticed in all of your work? You've been doing this work now, you say 20 years, maybe longer.
About that, yeah.
Yeah, about that. I think a lot of it, the organization was created in the ashes of 9/11, right? Originally.
Right. Yeah.
Can you give one or two examples of this, like where people were willing to let go of something and how that changed something?
Yeah. We initially were a 9/11 organization, and then the young people, as they began to hit adolescence or begin to leave home, were interested in talking to young people from other countries who had been through something a lot more often, even than what we had in this country with 9/11. And I remember one instance in particular when Osama bin Laden had been killed, and the young people said, this is not a place of joy. This is not a feeling of, we've achieved something here. For them, it felt like more killing. And it was very striking. It was their response was just so genuine, and they talked about that moment. I can remember a young woman from France whose father and uncle had been killed in her presence, and when the trial for the perpetrators came about, she happened to be with us, or it was just following that. She was with us and at Project Common Bond, and everybody in the group said, well, don't you just want that person to be convicted and sent to prison or condemned to death? And again, this young woman of 16 said, well, I just know that he didn't come into the world hateful and he
Mm.
didn't come into the world as a killer. So, no, I don't think that's what I wanted. So, those kinds of insights,
Yeah.
that again, once you've had that space to tell your story and to have it heard, it begins to move young people in particular toward a place of empathy for others. And then the last thing I'll mention, I think a young woman from Palestine just was saying, I don't know that this is ever going to change. And
Mm.
I feel despairing about it. And a young woman, and there was a long pregnant silence because what can you say
Yeah.
until a young woman from Northern Ireland said, don't give up. We didn't think we could ever get there. And though where we've gotten isn't complete and not perfect, but we got there. So I want to say that to you. So those things,
Yeah.
you know, they bring about change, and that's a peer to peer kind of discovery and understanding.
Yeah.
So,
Mm. You tell us a little bit about the program that you're doing at Kripalu this week.
yeah, this is a new program for us. Us being my organization, Dignity Beyond Borders.
Mm.
Our focus has been to provide um, programs and support for individuals who have had a loss due to terrorism, war, and mass violence. Um, it's the first time we've had a full on program in person with, in this case, mothers from the mass violence community. Um, Robert and I had been in some talks over the last year, and he very generously offered to partner with us um, to hold the program here. And the significance there, both in terms of support for what we're doing, but also to invite these women who, are bearing the unbearable, um, to be in a space that is also inviting them to take care of their bodies and reflect and be in beautiful nature. The other part of it that was so wise from Kripalu and Robert was, let's learn from each other. And so, can we have a member of our staff be a participant, a participant facilitator in the group? And that has been tremendous. We have a wonderful person in Jessica who's been with us. And this is, again, learning anew from this community. And it's women coming in with a great deal of trauma, who are at different stages of um, moving through their experience. I think to a person, they've said to be able to talk to one another and know that everybody in the room, every participant in the room knows what they've been through is such an antidote to the kind of isolation that experiences like this bring about. We have an art therapist. So the day is structured around a dignity session in the morning. Again, that idea of how do you honor your dignity when you've been through such a traumatic loss? And how do we honor you, women who remain and who are having to navigate this loss? And then in the afternoon, we have our art therapist who is doing work through art with the women. And then Jessica from the staff here, who's just been doing some beautiful movement work throughout each of the sessions. So, yesterday I asked everybody to just put a one word statement on a piece of paper that I collected. And the words were about fear and anxiety and is it okay to be here? And I shouldn't have left my kids at home and all of that. And we'll see what those words are on day 3 when we leave. And I think we also had to acknowledge that there were a number of women who had to drop out before we got started because of the fear. So it takes courage to show up, even though you're offering, the most beautiful place and the most loving, supportive environment. This is not an easy place to step into when you've been living with that kind of trauma.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So true. And we're so glad you're here. We're so glad you team are here with Jessica
Yeah.
in this, partnership that we said let's pilot something and see.
Yeah.
It's a big part of what we've been sort of in a deep listening around for the last, just over 12 months now around what is Kripalu's role with regards to peace in the world, and is there a role? And so it's been a long time of listening and prayer and meditating on those questions and listening to the land, and then what's emerging is these programs like your program. And we had an amazing group here a couple of weeks ago, Seeds of Peace, and they they had their whole team was here, and they hadn't been together for a long time. And they're a global organization, and they were for the first time able to really be together and build that sort of sense of internal community, which then will only strengthen how they do their work in the world.
I just to add on to that, I'm sorry if I'm jumping.
No, please. Yeah.
Finished. But I know well of Seeds of Peace and have great respect for what they're doing. They've been a guide in a lot of ways for our work with young people in particular. Yeah. Being able to have this program in person it does a number of things. I myself and another woman started Dignity Beyond Borders about a year ago with the idea of how do we meet what's going on in the world right now? Not that we can, but like, what do we have to offer? And if I knew now what I knew then about how to get something going, maybe I wouldn't be sitting here, but I'm very glad that I am. But it's when you can do the work and you see the possibilities that happen and the participants let you know that this is making a difference, then you'll go, forever. I mean, it's what fuels the possibilities. And so I just say that having this space and being able to do the work we know how to do just feels like the greatest encouragement.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
That's great.
Yeah.
So when we go up to a higher sort of altitude, and we look at, this country, the United States of America, where we're both on right now, or we look at the world, what is your sense of what needs to happen in order for there to be less conflict and more peace?
I believe that we need to build more relationships around dignity. I think we have seen both in the world and definitely in this country severe acts of indignity. We're at a real shortage in terms of how we even talk to one another. And I find that when we create these spaces, safe spaces for people to come together, and when they feel heard and seen, it opens up possibilities. And I wish the state of things was very different. And I know how easy it is to become cynical and become despairing. But I don't feel that way. I think there's hopefulness, and I see it happening when we're in action. And we've begun doing a lot of, meeting with different groups and saying, how does dignity fit in here? How does your workspace operate with a sense of dignity, or does it not? And are there ways it could be done differently? And so I'm on that side. And I just think I love the artist Patti Smith. And I remember at the last election, I happened to see her live, and she said, you know what, let's get back to work. And I kind of feel that like there's some good work to be done, and there are possibilities that can happen. So
yeah,
peace is a piece.
yeah, peace is a piece, and good work to be done regardless of who's in the Oval Office or who's in the Senate,
Absolutely.
who's in the House of Representatives. The amount of work that we have to do regardless.
Yeah.
And I think that point of somebody in Kripalu was talking about it recently. One of our new values as an organization is hope. And they work as a therapist with some private clients at times. And they said, sometimes my client has no hope. And so I, as a therapist, will hold on to hope for them.
Yeah.
And I think we need, in this time, if people feel like they can hold that torch of hope, to hold that torch of hope, because when that goes out everywhere, then we're in real trouble.
We're in trouble.
But, the truth of it is that, societies and countries and humanity at large has gone through really uncertain times. And I'm not even talking about necessarily the election now. Like there is just a time of deep uncertainty that we're in, and climate change and all of these things, and it can become so overwhelming, but that the possibility of our greatness still is there as a seed, sometimes as a sapling, sometimes as a great oak, and I hope we never lose sight of that.
I think that I believe everything that you said, and it just reminded me that when I work with groups like the group that we're with now, I just came back from Northern Ireland working with women who had losses due to war, etc. What I've learned from them is they are so much more than the terrible thing they've been through. And the work of sort of listening to and honoring all of who somebody is. And I think that's true for us in terms of the leadership. That doesn't define us. We can't let that define us if it doesn't feel like the right direction, but it's a call to action. And as one of the women that I met with in Northern Ireland said, my idea of dignity, she was from the UK, my idea of dignity, the one I grew up with, is that you have to keep a stiff upper lip. But I realized that means I'm not honoring my own dignity. I don't want to keep a stiff upper lip. And she went on to talk about the fact that, to create peace, you have to find inner peace to begin with. And that means being heard, being seen, and being supported. And we can do that.
Yeah.
We have that capacity. We all need it.
Yeah. And and to not get paralyzed by the idea of being Buddha, fully enlightened, fully at peace, with no fluctuations of the mind, as Patanjali says, that until we have arrived at this sort of constant abiding of inner peace, that we should do nothing in the world. It's like, what are the pieces of inner peace that can move us forward to working with the pieces of outer peace? And we just keep moving those dials. We allow our internal capacity to grow so that we can affect change in the external. But we don't have to be perfect, which is actually a very big, is an internal violence, that idea of perfection on ourselves. And often it's kind of like designed to keep us small and in place. Dr. King says, many don't climb the stairs because they can't see all the way to the top. And he's like, just take the first step. As imperfectly as you might take that first step.
Yeah.
And that could be a, the call to action to work in an organization like you do, or to donate, to support programs. Or it can be to decide that, for the next 4 years, I'm going to speak about people that voted to me differently with dignity.
Yes.
I'm going to speak about them with dignity. And I think that alone would have a massive impact on how we then are willing to show up to conversations. If people hear them not being called whoever is, whichever side you happen to be on, if we're talking about each other with dignity, I'd have much more willingness to show up and to listen to you as opposed to you just call me an idiot for voting a certain way. And
it's not about agreeing with.
No.
It's not about agreeing with, but it's simply offering that you have a point of view and it's different than mine, and I don't really understand it, but I'd like to hear what it is that led you to that belief, etc. That if any of us and all of us could do that, invite that kind of conversation, that's making a big change.
Yeah. It was one of the primary weapons, for want of a better word, that Gandhi used. Was seeing the inherent beauty in the British. And he said, I will remind, as we do this work, we will remind the British of their inherent gentlemanly-like nature. And so we'll see that in them. And even as they commit atrocities, even as they do things, we will continuously see that in them, not just a possibility of it, but the truth of it in them, even when they've forgotten about themselves. The British set up units to try and understand Gandhi's psychology. They could not understand him. They could not understand somebody would show up in this way and continue to speak about them, disagree with their policies and their presence, but always speak of them with dignity. And I think it was a big part of what undid them, the British Empire in India. They couldn't orient around it. It untangled something that allowed transformation to happen.
And, I think, again, words like peace and transformation and change can be so daunting. And I was having this conversation with Jessica earlier today, who's here. The idea that within this work, we're not tasked to change people, to make them different, we don't have that. We're tasked to show up and bring what we have. That in and of itself is enough.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times I've been in this situation where I feel like, oh my God, we're doing this, but it's not enough. And there's so much more. There's always more. Yeah. But what do we have here and now and today?
Yeah.
And that's what we can do. And we have that. We all have it.
Often you'll hear the phrase of Kripalu is love, serve, and surrender. Yeah. Love, serve, and then surrender, because we don't control the outcome.
No.
We really don't. Yeah.
And I don't think people want to be faced with somebody who says, I can control the outcome. I think it's much more inviting to say, let me hear what you have to say, and I can tell you what I think about this, and we'll see what possibilities there are.
Yeah.
But that sense of discovery and that feeling of independence around those discoveries is very key to this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Monica, we're at time. I know people have put into the chat dignitybeyondborders.org, so folks can learn a little bit more about the organization. And my hope, Monica, is that what you're doing with Kripalu this week is the start of a longer term partnership between us, and we can maybe get 40 of those young people to Kripalu for an extended period of time soon as well, and just continue on this good work.
Well, that is my hope as well. And again, that along the way, when you're trying to make things happen, and there are plenty of answers that say no, um, the invitation to maybe we could collaborate, let's partner, is just so heart filling and generative, and now it's real. We're
Yeah.
here, and so that is my hope as well. And I appreciate your gesture.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and your wisdom. And thanks to everybody who joined us here and for everybody that's watching in another time. Join us again for the next one. And in the meantime, enjoy the pieces of peace in your life. Be well.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Monica.